Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with a tag slash kind of a discussion video. So I was tagged by Hannah from Hannah's Books, what feels like a really long time ago, though I think it was just in December. But she tagged me in the ratings and reviews tag. And essentially this tag is a series of questions and prompts meant to make you discuss how you review books, kind of specifically if you are maybe a professional book reviewer or something like a booktuber. And so I think the questions are really interesting and they've really made me think, but I, for the most part, did not prepare an answer. I really wanted this to be off the cuff because I kind of am very wishy-washy, very flexible with the way that I review things. And I think that tends to change for me at least on a yearly basis, but probably sometimes more often than that. So my answers today might not be the answers that I would tell you next year this time. But essentially, we're just going to get into today how I review books and why I review books in the way that I do, kind of what my criteria is when I am reviewing a book. And so the first question in this tag is just to tag people. I really want to leave this open. I think all booktubers should do this and all book reviewers should do this because I think it's really interesting and I think everyone will have a very different answer to a lot of these questions. So the second question is, how do you know you just finished a good book? Is it a thinking or a feeling response? For me, it is a feeling most times. Sometimes it's a mix, actually, because there are a lot of books that I give 5 stars to on sort of an objective basis, because some books you read, especially classics, and you think they deserve 5 stars on merit alone. But a lot of times I will give a book 5 stars just because it felt like a 5-star book to me in the reading experience. And those books are often books that I recognize have a lot of flaws and on an objective level don't technically deserve the 5 stars the way that certain classics might. But for me, books like those, the books that I really have an instantaneous feel and pull towards emotionally, those are the best and most memorable books in my opinion. One of them is right here for me, and that is Half Sick of Shadows by Laura Sebastian. I recognize that's not a book for everybody. I recognize there are a lot of flaws in it. And maybe compared to something like, let's say, Great Expectations, you know, a real classic, does it deserve 5 stars? And that's where things get shaky for me. I think there is another question in here that we'll get into kind of rating system, but I kind of have 2 5 stars, like 2 knowing I just finished a good book feelings. And on some levels, that's technical. Technically, the book was really good. I wouldn't have done anything differently. I think it was really incredible. For me, that's most classics that I rate 5 stars. Classics don't pull me in emotionally the same way that modern books do. And I have never experienced, like, again, to take Half Sick of Shadows, I've never felt like that reading a classic. But I feel like that most frequently with modern fantasy. So classics that get 5 stars for me are often on a technical level. There are a few exceptions to this. The Count of Monte Cristo, I had a real initial emotional pull with, but for the most part, when I give a classic 5 stars, it's because I feel like it deserves it on merit. Technically, I really admire what it's doing. But then there is the kind of emotional 5 stars for me, and those are the most memorable and enjoyable books. And ultimately, for me, I think it does come down to a feeling. Question number 3 is, when you begin to form your review slash rating, what is the first question you ask yourself? And I kind of do this throughout the reading experience, and often within the first 100 pages of a book, I know what I'm going to rate it. And sometimes if I know I'm just going to rate it 3 stars or possibly 2 stars, I just go on and DNF it. But I guess the question I would say I ask myself is, what is it about this book that would make me recommend it to someone? I, on some level, struggle with recommending books or even reviewing them because recommendations and reviews factor so little into my own process of picking up a book, I really got into Booktube and the book review side of things really to discover what is out there, not because a particular review or a recommendation would make me pick something up, because I feel like I don't agree with a lot of reviewers, and so I think I often, throughout kind of the reviewing process, I ask myself what it is about this book that would make me recommend it to someone, but I also really want to talk about what the book meant to me personally, because I think there is an aspect to reviewing that should be objective on an objective level. What was the book doing well and what was the book doing terribly? But then there is also just kind of how you felt when reading it. And so that's often what I put in my review. And I'm not trying to persuade anybody 9 times out of 10 whether or not to pick up a book, because in a way, I guess I don't consider myself truly a book reviewer. I kind of view this space as a conversation and not really as me technically reviewing a book. And again, that's because for me personally, reviews don't factor much into my decision about whether or not I'm going to pick up a certain book. So I kind of think about what person I would want to recommend the book to, and then I also ask myself what about the book mattered to me. Why did I like it or not like it? And I think that helps me kind of get my thoughts more streamlined for when I do talk about the book. Number 4 is kind of a 3-part question. So do you do star ratings? Why and why not? So yes, I do, mostly because of Goodreads. Now, prior to Goodreads, which I guess I got on 10 years ago, I believe it was 2012 that I got on Goodreads. So I've technically been on that platform for 10 years and very little about it has changed. There's a lot of good and bad in that. That could be an entirely different video, my issues and my thoughts about Goodreads. But prior to Goodreads, I think I genuinely only ever thought of a book in terms of good or bad. And some of that is because in 2012, when I got on Goodreads, I was still a young reader. I was just around the age of 18, 19, 20. So I was still kind of in the young adult age range. And I most certainly was not thinking very critically about the books I was reading. And I certainly wasn't on Booktube, because I do think Booktube plays a large role in your critical thinking about a book and thinking about how you're going to discuss it. But prior to Goodreads, I think I was just like, this was a good book, I loved it, favorite, or this was bad. I don't even think there was much space in between that for me. I think I very rarely felt meh about a book because I used to DNF so much more frequently when I was younger. I would know within 10 pages that a book wasn't for me and I would just drop it. And so I really think the meh books for me fell by the wayside. And so really maybe I was left with truly good and bad, like 2 very opposite ends of the spectrum. Question 4A is, if yes, if you do use a star rating, explain your star rating system. What does a good book get in your rating system? And this is so confusing. This is where I change day to day. I won't even say this is year to year, but my star rating system changes based on emotion all the time. A good book gets for me generally a 4 or a 5 star. I don't know if that sounds high or low to you in terms of your own star rating system, and I would love to know if you use a star rating system, what it is down below, and if you're very strict about it, because I am not. Generally 3 stars means it was fine. Fine to good. And I probably, in the end, for a 3-star book, didn't have many thoughts about it one way or the other. I think 3-star books are the hardest books to review for me because I didn't feel one particular way about them. I think it's much easier to review a book you didn't like or to review a book you loved than it is to review a book that you felt just middle of the road about. And so 3 stars is generally my middle of the road. Probably again because of Goodreads, so they don't offer decimal points or anything. So truly the halfway mark between 1 and 5 would be 2.5, I guess. Since Goodreads does not offer that, I kind of just set it at 3, which I think might be high or low for some other people. 2 stars for me is a bad book. The reason I will say 1 is not a bad book is that I have genuinely never to my memory on Goodreads ever rated a book 1 star. I think it is because for me to give 1 star, it just feels so incredibly mean. I just can't really describe it. 1 star to me means that the book has absolutely 0 merit and that it is in fact harmful. I would award a 1 star book to a book that I think is genuinely offensive, genuinely harmful in its messaging. And so for the most part, a book that I just didn't like, it didn't do enough to gain only 1 star for me, and so I give it 2. Where I will say this is flexible is back to kind of my dual system of 5 stars. So I have kind of 2 systems for giving 5 stars. I give 5 stars based on merit, based on thinking that the book actually deserved it. Like I said, most of the time that would be a classic book. Then I have 5 stars that's based on emotional pull. This is what gets me confused sometimes, is that often I will think that a book didn't technically deserve 5 stars, so I'll only give it 4. And then when I go back and look at my Goodreads shelf and I see all of my 5 stars, and for the most part, they're books that I can agree were on a general level very, very good. Really, you couldn't critique them. Did I experience the same emotional pull for a book like Jane Eyre as I did for a book like the Grisha trilogy? Those are 2 5 stars for me. One deserves the 5 stars more, in my opinion, on a technical level, which would be Jane Eyre. On an emotional level, in terms of a favorite book, a book that I would recommend to anybody, a book that I just genuinely love, I've reread time and time again, it's the Grisha trilogy. And so that's where I kind of struggle, is that I often sometimes will say, a book doesn't really deserve 5 stars, so I'll give it 4. But in general, there are a lot of 4-star books on my shelf that I enjoyed more than books that I've given 5 stars. And sometimes I'll give a 5 star to a book because even though I know it's not technically a 5 star, I feel like it's more than a 4 star. And if there was a decimal system on Goodreads, some books would probably hit more frequently for me in the 4.5 range than would really either end up at 4 or 5 stars. And so those books are always tricky for me because I tend to try to round up. And so there are some books that, again, have 5 stars that probably in general should have been given 4. I have a very confused star rating system, and it's why I don't often mention star ratings very often unless they are locked in for me. So a lot of times in my wrap-ups, I just talk about whether I liked or didn't like the book, and I very rarely will say what the star rating is. Sometimes it's just because I forget, but a lot of times it's also just because for me that can be very flexible, and I'll go back in weeks later and change the rating because again, a 4-star book like say Great Expectations, the first time I read that, for me it was 4 stars. I thought it was good. I didn't think it was mind-blowing, but it is a book that I had consistently thought about since finishing it, and it's always at the front of my mind. I've recognized that it's a favorite book of mine. I went back and rated it 5 stars. So that's definitely the most flexible and probably the most confused part of my rating and review system. So there technically was a second part to question 4A that I've already answered, which is your star rating consistent? i.e., are all of your 5-star books better than all of your 4-star books? No, so that's already been answered. Question 4B is if you don't do a star rating system, what language do you use to convey the quality of a book in your reviews? Does this form an informal rating or ranking? And I think that's a really interesting question because even though I use a star rating system, I do also use language because I talk here on BookTube, but I very rarely write up a review. I think this would be a very interesting question for people who publish, for people who keep a blog, because I very rarely write up a review. And I often will only do it if a book made me feel one of 2 extremes, if I either really, really loved it or if I really, really hated it. But this is a question I would be interested to hear from. If you don't use a star rating system, what type of language do you use to convey how you felt about a book? Because that's a really interesting question and I'm not really sure how I would answer it. I'm not sure what language technically I use to convey my feelings on a book other than to tell you straight up whether or not I liked it or not. And maybe there are people out there that are a little bit apprehensive of truly saying that. Especially in classics communities, I've noticed this. It is very difficult to critique certain classics because some people view them as above criticism. That's not true. Every book is worthy of some criticism, even your favorites of all time. Even Dante. Dante's my favorite of all time. If you don't like Dante, I have no beef with you. I don't care. It does not affect me. But some people, I think, are deeply affected by you criticizing their favorite book or by a work that they think is so important to the canon. And so I think that's a very difficult place to be, specifically as a reviewer of classics. Number 5, do you believe every book has its perfect reader? Does this contradict the idea that a book can be bad? Yes, every book probably does have its perfect reader. No, it does not contradict the idea that a book can be bad. There are plenty of books that I have enjoyed in my time, specifically when I was a younger reader, that I recognized weren't all that great, but that I enjoyed. And again, maybe this goes into the conversation of enjoyment versus kind of the technical quality of what you were reading, because for me, enjoyment is far more important than how technically proficient the writing of a book is. If you're enjoying it, who cares? That's why fan fiction is so big. A lot of fan fiction is not very well edited or very well written, but it is enjoyable on a certain level that it's hard to kind of replicate elsewhere. And so for me, maybe this does, in fact, mean that there can't be a bad book, because if somebody is enjoying it, the book is not bad. Number 6 is, what is a book that you hated that you have recommended? And I think this is Sister Song by Lucy Holland, which was easily my worst book of 2021. This was also my most anticipated book of 2021. I had very, very bad luck with my anticipated reads last year, and it's made me very apprehensive about the books that I have pre-ordered this year. But this was just so incredibly poorly done to me on a technical level, on a story level, and on an enjoyment level. Nothing was good about this. But I recognize that it probably does have its niche audience, and so I have recommended it to people. I have also talked people out of buying this. So I feel like things have evened out, because I did talk a woman out of buying this book at Barnes & Noble not too long ago, when she was talking to a bookseller and she asked had anyone recommended this book, and the bookseller hadn't read it. So I walked up to her and I said, I don't think it was good. And she said, well, I'm looking for something like Juliet Marillier. I said, put it back down. It's not like Juliet Marillier. But some people are looking for Juliet Marillier, but more edited and more pared down. If that's what you're looking for, Sister Song will work very well for you. I like the meandering, really prose and thought-heavy work of Juliet Marillier. That's not what Sister Song is. Sister Song is more pacey at times, and I think it's worse on characterization than she is, but I think it gets its point across in a much shorter amount of time. And if you're somebody who thinks Juliet Marillier is long-winded, then you will probably like Sister Song. So I would recommend it to people. It's just a book that I thought was really, really bad. Number 7 is, what makes a book good, bad, or great by your evaluation? Okay, this is interesting. This is one I didn't prepare an answer for. So again, I think this is something that probably varies for me year to year. What makes a book bad? Let's go with the bad first. Taking Sister Song as an example, bad characterization for me. If I don't like the characters, we're in trouble here. And I often think a book is bad not when it has unlikable characters. There is a difference between an unlikable character and a character you don't like, if this makes sense. I think unlikable characters are devices used by authors to explore different concepts. And so I think there are many examples of this in fiction that work very, very well. Let's think Scarlett O'Hara, Gone with the Wind, Becky Sharp from Vanity Fair. These are people that are categorized as unlikable, but they are designed to be unlikable. You are meant to interrogate how you feel about them as a reader. Specifically when you take somebody like Scarlett O'Hara, who goes through something over the course of the novel or the film, and then kind of comes out on top a little bit at the end, and you find yourself rooting for a character that you hated at the start of the story. That's interesting to me. And I often can enjoy a character that is designed to be unlikable. There are characters that are just unlikable, but that you were meant to be rooting for as a reader. That's when I think a book is bad. If I am supposed to like the character, but I don't, we're in trouble. If a character is stupid, but I am supposed to be rooting for them, if they just continually make incredibly poor decisions, I think the book is poorly written. Hand in hand with that is making a character make poor decisions in order to establish a plot. If your character has to be foolish in order for you to create a plot, the book's badly written. That's when I think a book is bad. There's a lot of talk about prose style in a bad book. That's less so for me because I know I'm a sucker for purple prose. Other people are not, and they really want good, quick, serviceable prose. Prose is not what tips a book into being bad for me, but it is what tips a good book into great. If prose is done very, very well, that's when I would say the book is great rather than good. But that's not always the case. Good characterization is also when a book tips the scale from good to great for me. One of my favorite books from the past few years is Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. This is currently my favorite YA series ongoing. The prose is nothing special. The characterization is genuinely incredible to me. And it is so great that I overlook the fact that I just think that the prose is very plain because I am just so invested in the characters. And so that's something that tipped that book into great, into 5-star territory for me, was the characterization. A book just being good means it is a book I could finish. And it is a book that I enjoyed the process of reading, but it's a book that I probably won't think about much ever again. And that's hard to make a decision on immediately after finishing a book. But as time has gone on, especially like if you're doing a monthly wrap up, if it was a book I read at the start of the month and I've thought nothing else about it, but I know I enjoyed it during the time I was reading it, that was a good book. But it wasn't a great one because it's not a book that stuck with me. Number 8, when evaluating the quality of a book, do you have specific criteria or aspects of the book, such as character development, that you consider? Does this change if you are writing an in-depth review versus just thinking about the book for enjoyment? Okay, I'm going to go with the second part of this question first. My entire relationship with this has changed since coming onto BookTube because there is really no book that I read that I don't plan on discussing on my channel. So I am always, in a way, thinking about how I am going to discuss the book or review the book, if that makes any sense. And even books that I know for the most part that my subscriber base don't care about. I know probably most people don't subscribe to me for my feelings on YA fantasy, but that's something that I really love reading and I have a lot of complex thoughts about. And so I often am always thinking about how I am going to convey those thoughts on camera. So there's very rarely a time when I would say I read a book for enjoyment. I mean, that's all books. I read all books for enjoyment, but I am also always thinking about how I would discuss them because there are no books that I don't talk about on the channel, if that makes sense. There are no books that I just read and I don't plan on discussing. And I would be interested to know if that's something that other booktubers do. Are there books that you save just for you that you don't discuss on camera? That's really interesting, and it's not something that I've ever thought to do. I do have a specific criteria that I go down when I am thinking about the quality of a book. Prose is up there for me. Prose because it is something that is just kind of a sentimental favorite of mine, and it is a quality of a book that would make me rate it 5 stars when otherwise it would just have been a regular good book. Prose is at the top of my list for what I evaluate. It's not something that factors much into my review on camera. I only mention it if I think the prose is stunning, but it is something for me that I judge for my personal enjoyment all the time. Then it's character development. If I don't feel anything for the characters, I mean, we're really just gonna have a tough time. A book where nothing is happening, but a book that has great characters is still an amazing book to me. But if I don't care about the characters, even if the plot is incredible, I'm probably just not having that great a time. So character development is probably second in importance for me. Then it's setting. I know this sounds strange, but for me, atmosphere, vibe, that really matters to me in a book. The aesthetic, you might even say. And setting factors into that in a really interesting way. And I think some authors have the gift for setting and others don't. And so this can be any setting. I'm not saying that I prefer forests over fields or something like that in terms of a setting, though I do, in fact, prefer forests over fields in terms of setting. But I really just mean how you can convey setting to me. Can I easily visualize this? Is this a place I can see? Or am I really struggling with your descriptions? So maybe that kind of goes hand in hand with prose. Maybe it's more description based. And then kind of near the bottom of my list is plot. Plot matters. I won't say that it doesn't, because a book where nothing is happening can still be a slog, even if you just really enjoy the writing or you enjoy the characters. Sometimes it can still be a slog, so you do want something to be going on. But I am not a plot-driven reader. I don't read for the plot. I read for the characters. It does factor into my decision, but it's probably at the bottom of my list. Number 9, do you consider star ratings or average ratings when choosing books to read or add to your TBR? No. I really do not. I never noticed that. I really will say that for me, I think this actually goes into one of the last questions here. People's reviews matter extremely little to me in my decision for buying a book, ordering a book, picking up a book used, or just picking up the next book to read. I really look at reviews and I look at BookTube to learn what's out there, because reviewing and whether or not you like a book is so very personal. There is really very little on an objective level that you can say about a book that would sway me. And in fact, 90% of the people that I watch on BookTube, and I'm not exaggerating, I think this is really true, 90% of the people I watch on BookTube have zero reading taste in common with me. If they do have reading taste in common with me, they don't like the same books that I do. And so there are a lot of people I watch that when they say they hate a book, I figure that I will like it. And so maybe that does kind of factor into my decision. But very rarely, I never look at the average rating on Goodreads. I know that's a thing that's kind of gone around, reading the top rated books on my Goodreads TBR, reading the lowest rated books, and kind of saying whether or not you think the general average rating is the truth. And I think those are very interesting and valuable videos, because I think it shows why people review the way that they do. And again, it shows that reviewing is so very personal. Someone else, and in fact, the vast majority of the people who read the book, could hate it. But you very well might love it if you know it's got the things that you really like in it. But for me, that is certainly not really a factor in my decision, and it's something that I don't pay very much attention to. Number 10, who on BookTube does reliable and interesting reviews of books that you know you can use to decide if a book is for you or not? What makes their reviews so good? So again, I don't really take people's reviews as a personal recommendation or a reason to pick up a book or not. But there are several booktubers that I just love to listen to and that I think really convey their thoughts in such an interesting and concise way. And these are actually booktubers who don't have very much in common with me in terms of reading taste. So another Jennifer, Jen from Insert Literary Pun here, I will watch any video she makes, and she does in fact make me question my reading taste, because often how she will review a book will make me wonder if in fact I really do want to try literary fiction, if I do in fact really want to delve more into dense historical nonfiction. She is a booktuber that makes me question myself and makes me really want to expand my horizons, because she is such an incredible reviewer of books. I think she does a really interesting mix of talking about a book objectively, but also placing it in its context. which I think is very, very important for classics specifically. But she also reads about very sensitive periods in history that are relatively modern. And so she will often contextualize a book that is a nonfiction about a certain time period based on how the people of that country feel about it, based on how other scholars have reviewed the book. I just think Jen's videos are really, really inspiring. And also Claire from Claire Reads Books. She is another who I feel very little in common with as a reader, but that I just think she really is a phenomenal book reviewer. She has a real gift. I think she mentioned in one of her most recent videos that she scripts her videos. And I can see that she probably does because she really lays out information and gets it across in such interesting and concise ways. She's just a really interesting book reviewer who again makes me always want to expand my horizons. And last but not least is the booktuber that inspired me to start my own channel. And I've said this before, but Steve Donahue is the booktuber that convinced me that I could do this, that I could create my own channel and that I could keep up with it, because Steve is, like me, an eclectic reader. And he reads a wide variety of things. And I think I thought before getting into BookTube that you had to have a specialty. You kind of had to have a genre that you tended to stick with most predominantly, because years ago, I think this is really getting better, but years ago, people tended to strictly be romance, fantasy, classics. And I am somebody who reads a wide variety of things, and I mix them all up month to month. I'm not someone who just reads one genre of things or one time period of things. And Steve's channel was the first one I saw that was doing something like that. And I think Steve, of course, is a very skilled book reviewer because he has been book reviewing for very, very many years. And so he is somebody who has got it down pat. He's the person on BookTube that is the most likely to sell me on a book. Steve is dangerous because I actually will listen to Steve when he says this is an incredible book that everyone should have read. And I tend to think maybe on many levels I just agree with Steve. Maybe Steve Donahue has a similar book taste to me. And so he is someone whose recommendations I will say I do very much trust. And I think all three of these people, Jen, Claire, and Steve, are excellent, excellent book reviewers. And last but not least, question number 11, does that or those booktubers use different language than you to evaluate and review the overall quality of a book? That is a really interesting question. And I am going to say no. I think that they discuss books and they talk about books in a very similar way to me. I think that I probably respond to them and their book reviews because I think we are often reviewing for the same reasons and we are talking about things for the same reasons. This is really the most interesting question of the bunch because I don't want to say I feel like I review books in their style at all, but I think the things that stick out to them also stick out to me in the reading process and are why I decide whether or not I liked a book, whether or not I would recommend it, whether or not I would give it 5 stars. And I think we all have similar reasons for why we rate books in the way that we do. So that was the ratings and reviews tag. I would love to know down below your rating scale, how you review books. And if you are someone who is not a booktuber and not a book blogger or anything like that, do you review books for yourself? Is there somewhere that you kind of record your own book reviews, or do you kind of use something like Goodreads? But that is going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.